Hello everyone. This is the video companion to the Getting Started with RStudio guide. So as always, this PDF is posted on the website, so if you prefer reading as opposed to listening to somebody talk, go ahead and check out this PDF. It will contain basically the same information as this video will. There's also one of these for R instead of just plain, or instead of RStudio. I would highly recommend looking at the Getting Started with R PDF/video first. And that's mainly because a lot of the stuff that you can do in the R console, which is discussed in that video, applies here basically the same amount. There's more stuff that RStudio can do, which is what I'm going to be focusing on in this video. But if you want the specifics on R itself as examples, using R as a calculator, entering code, some of the common functions, all of that kind of stuff, that is in the Getting Started with R PDF. This is just to talk about the additional stuff that RStudio can do, or the stuff that RStudio does differently than R. So this is probably going to be a bit shorter than the Getting Started with R video, but let's go ahead and open up RStudio. So here's RStudio. I just have it as a desktop icon. And when you open it, it looks like this, or something like this. If you're using a Mac, it might look a little bit different. But if you're using a PC and this is the first time you've opened RStudio, it probably looks something like this. Now, quick thing before we get started with this, you do need to have R installed first before you open RStudio. Once you've installed R and then you install RStudio, the two will automatically pair. So RStudio will look for your R program and will kind of link to it. But you do need to have R installed in order to use RStudio. So if you haven't done that, or if you're watching these before you even install R or RStudio, go ahead and install R first and then install RStudio. All right, so let's talk about this interface here. So there's really 4 panes in this RStudio program. There's this one down here. There's this one up here. And then to the right, so I'm just going clockwise here. To the right, there's this one up at the top. And then this 4th one down here. So in the PDF, I have these numbered from the bottom left clockwise, 1, 2, 3, and 4. We'll talk about those in just a second. But a quick thing about these panes, or windows, I'm going to call them panes, you can adjust how they're displayed. So if you take a closer look at this, you'll see that there's kind of a little border around all 4 of these. And notice that when I hover my cursor around the border, there is a little, my cursor changes to indicate that I can move that line. And in fact, if I click and drag this line from left to right, it will contract those windows on the left and expand the ones on the right. And if I click in either this horizontal border here, scroll or drag up and down, or this one here, drag up and down, I can readjust the sizes of those windows, which can be really useful. Say if you want this window to be kind of your big one, you can drag it down so that that bottom window is a lot smaller. You can move these to the side if you're not going to be using them much. For a lot of classes, you probably won't use these very much, at least at the start, but you can adjust them to your liking. Now, sometimes you might accidentally close a window or close a pane or make it so that you can't see it and you're not sure where it is. So for example, if I close this window, or this pane, it totally goes away. I'm like, oh no, I need that back. You can get them all back by going up to View, Panes, and then this is already checked, but if you click it again, it will kind of reset the display here, and it will make all 4 panes show up and be approximately the original size. So you can still adjust them if you want to, but it just makes sure all 4 of them are there so that you have all 4 of them if you need them. All right, so let's talk about these 4 panes and what they do. So let's start as in the order of my numbering here with the bottom left-hand pane. So I'm going to call this pane number 1. And this pane right here is actually your R console. So if you started this whole process of installing R by installing R itself, and maybe you watched the Getting Started with R video, or you read the Getting Started with R PDF, you already kind of know about the R console. This is the place where you will type your code. So for example, if I activate this pane, you can see I have a blinking cursor here. This is my R prompt, and I can type here. I can enter code. I can do anything I could do in your regular old R. So this pane here, you can kind of think of it as the R part of RStudio. So this is where R sits in the whole interface, in the whole display of RStudio. So anything that was talked about in the Getting Started with R video or in that corresponding PDF, you can do in the console, just like you could do in the regular R console. So just to emphasize that here really quick for anybody who's trying to decide between R and RStudio, which one you want to work with. Let me open R up here. What I'm talking about is this is this. So this R console here in R is this bottom left-hand pane in RStudio. So that's just basically RStudio takes this and puts it in that bottom pane. So if you want to learn more about the specific things you can do in the console that you can do in regular old R, please check out that Getting Started with R PDF and or the corresponding video. So this is the stuff that in this pane you can do with regular R. Let's talk about these other three panes as well. So I'm going to move up from the R console to the pane that's above that. I'm going to call this pane 2, and this is the R script pane. So just like with R, an R script is a plain text file that you can put your R code in. So like I said in the Getting Started with R video, if you are on PC and you're familiar with the Notepad application, that's basically what this is. It's just built into R and built into RStudio. Notice it says R script down here. So this is like a text file. You can type in here, you can write code. I should actually not write some nonsense. Let me just write some code. And this works, again, very similar to how it works if you were to open a script in plain old R. So again, just for comparison's sake, if I go into R and I click File, New Script, this is this upper left-hand window. It's just a little bit nicer in the sense that it's a little bit more organized. So rather than having to kind of panel these windows yourself in R, they're already paneled, they're already one on top of the other in RStudio, and it's kind of nice. And again, this is basically the same script as it is in R, but there are actually, I consider there to be 3 additional benefits of using RStudio for the script over the use of just R for the script. So the first kind of benefit of using RStudio over R when you're keeping your code in a script like this is that RStudio automatically color codes your script. And you kind of see that already, right? So these numbers are blue. The variable names are black. The assigners, so this little arrow here and this equal sign, they're gray. Other arithmetic symbols are gray. If you comment, so again with a comment, as we talked about in the Getting Started with R video, start a comment line with a hashtag. Comments are green, so they're really easy to see. And it's really easy to kind of notice the different parts of your code when it's color-coded. Functions also turn blue, so it kind of is a way to see the different components of your code, and those comments especially, I think, stand out. So it makes it a little bit easier to see what's what in your code. Might make it a little bit easier to read. That's one benefit. Another benefit, as you can see along the side of the code here, is that RStudio automatically numbers your code lines. So every line gets a number, which is a benefit in the sense that if you are maybe explaining your code to somebody else, or you're trying to troubleshoot your code to your instructor or TA, you can say, I don't know, is my code in line 3 correct? Or I was trying to do a calculation from the notes in line 7, am I doing that correctly? Or why isn't line, I don't know, why isn't line 47 running? That kind of thing. So it makes it a little bit easier to keep your code organized and to reference certain lines. The third, and I think the most beneficial benefit of using RStudio over R when you're writing your code in scripts like this is that RStudio offers suggestions based on what you type. And typically this shows up when you're trying to type a function. So the example that I use in the PDF is the dbinom function. So depending on the class you're taking, you may or may not use that function. You're probably not familiar with it yet if this is your first time opening R and you're watching these videos. But let's pretend that we know what this function is, dbinom. Help if I could spell it. There we go. And as I start typing it, once I type the first parentheses, not only does it type the close parenthesis so I don't accidentally forget it, but it tells me in that little pop-up there, it tells me the arguments that that function takes. And of course, once you're familiar with this function, you'll know what each of those things mean. But it's kind of a nice little hint or a reminder of what a function takes. It helps you out by saying it needs a vector, it needs the sample size, it needs the probability of success in the case of dbinom. And this is the case for pretty much any function that you might use, at least in kind of the level that we'll be using them in stats classes at U of C. So it's a really nice additional feature. Some of the functions are so simple there isn't really any suggestions, but it's a really nice feature to help you out with code, especially when you're starting to deal with more functions that require more input or more arguments. So those are some of the benefits of using the script in RStudio as opposed to the script in R, because as we saw, everything is just black here. There's no color distinguishing. It's not numbered, and there's no code help. So for example, if I did dbinom here, oops, if I did dbinom here, nothing pops up to help me out. It's just a blank text editor, basically. Let me actually clear my R console here so it's easier to see. All right, so what about running code? So this is kind of similar to how you do it in R if you're running code from a script. If I want to run, for example, this first line, what I do is I put my cursor in that line, and then in this top window here, I'm going to go click on the Run button here. Or I could hit Control-Enter. Either one works. But if I hit Run, notice that it sends that line to my R console, and my cursor shows up after it, meaning that it has already run this for me. So I should know what X is, because I just told R what X was. If I'm just doing a plain calculation, it just spits out the calculation for me. And just like in plain old R, I can highlight multiple lines if I want to run them all at once. So say I just want to run these lines, and I can hit Run, and it will run all those lines for me. All right, now, just like in R, I can save these scripts as well. So if I wanted to save this script, maybe this was text, or maybe this was code from an assignment or from examples in the lecture notes or something, I can save this by going up to File, Save As. But the first thing I want to do, just to make sure I'm saving the right thing, is I want to make sure this is the active window. So I don't want to click in the console. I don't want to click over here. I want to make sure my cursor is blinking in the script, so that when I go File, Save As, it will save the script and nothing else. So here I could save this as, I don't know, RStudio example script, and save it wherever. This is just saving in my documents. I can save it on my desktop, wherever. And then notice that the name shows up here. So now this is the name of the script. And if I were to close this or exit out of that window, I can actually reopen the script window by opening a script. So I can go to File, Open File, and then I can just go ahead and select the script that I want. So there it is again. Another nice thing about RStudio, which you can do in R, but it's a little bit less cluttered here, is you can open multiple scripts at a time. So let's say I have this one open, but maybe there's another one that I want to refer to later. Let's say this one. If I open another script, what it's going to do is it's just going to open it as another tab in the script window here. So I can toggle between these tabs if I want to. I can do back and forth with running code from different scripts. It's just a kind of a nice way to keep them organized here. And of course, I can close these by hitting the X button. And if I change them, RStudio will ask me if I want to save my changes. So for most people, especially when you're first starting to use R and RStudio, these are the two main windows. The script window up at the top left here, and the console window down at the bottom left here, which shows all of the results of your code. But there are two other windows over here, so I'm going to talk about them a little bit as well. So let's go up to the top right here. This is the environment and history window or pane. Now, typically you're not going to be using this too much. Just to explain what two of these tabs do, though, the environment tab will show you all of the declared or named quantities that are in your R session. So basically it tells you the names of all of the values or sets of values that are active or in use in your R session. So as we saw in this script here, I defined X. I didn't run this line with Y, but if I were to run that, Y would show up here and it would be a value of 1. This vector shows up here. It basically just tells you the names of all the things that you've declared. So if you've got like 40 different things in your code, this might be useful because what it does is it will list all of those here for you for reference, so that you can see what values are what and what you named them and all of that kind of stuff. It's kind of more of a reference panel. You don't really do too much with it. The other tab in this panel is the History tab, and this really just shows you the history of the stuff that you've entered in RStudio over the last, I don't even know how many times how many sessions it shows you. This was from when I taught in the spring, so this was a little while ago, but it shows you the history. And again, if you're saving your script, if you're saving your code, this doesn't really do too much for you, but it is a reference just to see maybe code that you accidentally forgot to save or something like that. You can see what it is in the history. And again, like I said, there's not really much that we're going to be doing with this third panel here, this third pane. But if you do end up in a course where you have to import a data set into R, which is probably a decent number of classes, this import data set button will be useful for you. And if you're looking for a reference on importing data, if you're ever to that stage after watching this video, there is an importing data using RStudio PDF, which will tell you how to use this button or use the menus to import data sets. So not too much for this third window here. And let's go ahead and take a look at this fourth window right here. All right, so this fourth window has a couple of different tabs, as you can see: Files, Plots, Packages, Help, and Viewer. The Viewer one doesn't really do too much, not too exciting, but these first four can be useful depending on what you're doing. So the first tab in this fourth pane shows the files in your working directory. So by default, the working directory is discussed in the importing data using RStudio. So more information about the working directory is found in that video and in that associated PDF. But basically your working directory is the thing that R points at by default to look for files or data or things to import. By default, my working directory is my documents folder. So this is just showing all the random nonsense I have in my documents folder. So all the different file types. Some of them you can open in R, some of them you can't. But it's just showing you all of the possible files in your working directory. And this is actually nice and useful because if you're saving your scripts in your working directory, you can actually go to the Files pane and the Files tab here and just click on the script that you want to run, and it will open it in the script window. So kind of a shortcut to opening scripts is if you're saving them in your working directory, they will show up in this Files tab. So let's say this thing here, this is an R script. Notice it's got a .r as a file type. If I click on this, just click on the name, what it's going to do is it's going to open that script right in my script window here as another tab. So this is just opening another script. So that's the Files tab. Can be useful, maybe not, depending on where you're saving your scripts. The second tab in this final pane is the Plots tab. So the Plots tab is blank right now, but this is a useful tab because it will display any plots or graphics that you create in R. So again, in most cases, if you're watching this video, you don't know how to make a plot in R yet, but you might learn how to do that in whatever course you're taking. But just as an example, let me do a quick plot. There's one of these in the PDF, but let me just do a quick one here. Let me just make two vectors of random values. These don't mean anything. Just calling one vector x variable and the other vector y variable. And let's put 8, 0, 30, and 2 again. Okay, so I'm just making an example here where I'm going to make a scatter plot of these values. And this is just for demonstration's sake. At this point, if you're watching this video, you are probably not expected to know how to make a scatter plot, so don't worry about that. This is just for demonstration's sake. But if I run this code, so there, notice that these vectors are becoming declared values in my environment pane up here, and they're showing up in my console. And if I click on, or if I run this 11th line here, the plot line, what's going to happen is a plot is going to show up in this plot window. So notice that this plot is kind of squished. It's a little flat. If you want to expand a plot, you can click on the zoom button and it will open it in another window at its normal size, so it's a little bit easier to see, and you can adjust this as much as you want to. And you can also export these plots. So if you make something that shows up in this plot window, you can click the export button, you can save it as an image, you can save it as a PDF, you can even like copy it to the clipboard if you want to paste it into Word or something like that. So this is this plot tab is really useful once you start actually exploring data with visuals. The next tab here is the Packages tab. And this tab displays all of the installed R packages on your computer. Sometimes that shows up for me, sometimes it doesn't. Let me just click this button and it'll show up my packages for you. Packages are useful for certain calculations or certain functions that are not built into the base R package. There is more information on packages and how to install them and when you need them in the installing and loading packages using RStudio PDF. So again, this is something I'm not going to go over in detail here. But if you ever are in a situation where you need to install a package or load a package into your R session, this window can help you out there because it has a nice easy install button here. And just like when we were talking about the script files, if you just click on one of these, it will automatically load it into R. So it will automatically run the package and get it into R for you. All right, now the last window I want to talk about here, or the last tab of this pane, is the Help tab. So we talked a little bit about this when we were talking about getting started with R, but just like we talked about in that video, there might be times where you need help or documentation on a function that you are using in R. So maybe you're taking a course that needs, once again, the dbinom function. And maybe in addition to this help here, maybe you want to know a little bit more about the function. Like, what does the function do? What is the input? What are some related functions? And when you are using R or RStudio, you can actually get information about functions by typing a question mark in your console and then typing the name of the function. So this was, what did I say, dbinom? So if I type a question mark in front of the name of a function and then hit enter, what's going to happen is R is going to open up its built-in R documentation, which is like a help file, and that's going to show up in the help window. So I already did this for binomial, so let me do it for a different function. Let me do question mark mean. So if I hit enter, notice that this help window or this help tab switches to the mean function, and it tells us that it calculates the arithmetic mean for a vector that you give it. It also gives you some information about the things you give to the function in order for it to work and some examples. So this is something that can be useful maybe if you're not familiar with a function, or maybe you forgot what the function does, or you want a little bit more information on a function. That can be helpful there. So again, RStudio is basically an additional housing for R. In addition to the R console itself, it also provides a window for scripts, a window talking about the environment or the active variables and history of your R code. And it has this additional window here that contains the files in your working directory, a place that plots can appear, a list of your packages in case you are using additional packages, and an additional little window here that contains topics help files. So again, you can do pretty much everything for a specific class in just plain old R, but RStudio makes it a little bit nicer and maybe a little bit easier and more organized, especially when you're first starting to use R. So if you're somebody who's a little bit worried about just running this console on its own, it looks a little intimidating and it looks pretty barren, you might want to try RStudio. It's a little bit more, I want to say user-friendly is kind of the word I'm looking for, and it's a little bit more organized, and it makes coding, I think, a little bit easier, especially when you're first starting to learn.